Hey y'all, I'm just setting up the live stream. Bear with me for a minute. Okay, let's see. Hope everybody is doing well. All right, we want this picture. I'm trying my hardest not to sing. Okay, because this is a serious topic tonight. But I could sing some spiritual songs. Hold on, y'all. Okay, we want the customization. So I'm setting the chat to subscribers. So if you want to chat, please subscribe. Check and make sure you are subscribed to my channel because sometimes YouTube will unsubscribe you for no reason. All right, I'm almost done. Okay, let's see. Let's see who we got in here. We got Derek. Hey, Derek, you're the first one. Hey, Tara, how you doing? Hey, Abu. What's up, Meep? Hey, Tyrell. Hey, Real Real. Hey, Alex. I did have to listen. I listened to some gospel music today because this story gave me the chills. And this isn't the first time I learned about this story. I learned about this story years ago when I was a child. But I even did a podcast on it years ago when I had my podcast, the Ace of Cups radio show. So back then when I did the podcast, I remember the whole story really shook me up. And it really just, it was very unnerving. So I experienced the same emotions last night because I watched the same documentary that I watched years ago, and man, that documentary, if you want to watch it, I'll post the link in the description section after I'm done this live stream. But the documentary about Jim Jones, this particular documentary, because there's quite a few of them, but this one in particular, it's really good, but it's really heart-wrenching as well. And man, I was going through it last night just emotionally, just thinking about like, I can't believe like something like this happened. And what's interesting is it's not really talked about much in history. And I was talking to my daughter about the whole Jim Jones cult. And she said the same thing. She was like, that story's not really talked about. And I was like, yeah, now I have a reason why it's not really talked about. And probably some of you that are watching this might be hearing about this story for the first time. Or you might have heard about it, but you may not know all the details. So, welcome everyone. And yeah, this is a really tragedy that I'm going to get into. But we're going to get into the astrological wherefores and whys this situation happened with this individual. So, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started right away because I don't have much time tonight. Now, I was trying to come up with a good title because I like to create titles for these sponsored videos, but it didn't come to me yet. So I might be changing the title of this video later on. All right, and what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna play this video. I'm just gonna play the audio of it because you know how YouTube be acting. They're probably gonna give me a copyright strike if I play the, video along with the audio. But I'm gonna play an audio which is an account of one of the survivors of the People's Temple cult. Basically, to make the long story short, the People's Temple, it was this religious cult run by Jim Jones, the guy that you see on the screen. And basically, the way it ended was they called it a mass suicide, but some people say it was a mass murder, which I do believe that was more so of a mass murder than a mass suicide. But it was 909 people lost their lives on November 18th, 1977, I believe. Let me just read real quick. Just one. All right, let's just read about him real quick before I play this audio. So, James Warren Jones, otherwise known as Jim Jones, was an American cult leader, preacher, and mass murderer who founded and led the People's Temple between 1955 and 1978. Jones and the members of his inner circle planned and orchestrated a mass murder suicide that resulted in the deaths of over 900 people, which he described as revolutionary suicide, in his remote jungle commune at Jonestown, Guyana, on November 18, 1978, including the assassination of U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan. Jones and the events that occurred at Jonestown have had a defining influence on society's perception of cults. So over 900 people, 909 to be exact in terms of the cult members. But then there was about five people that died, including a congressman, because this congressman named Leo Ryan, he went down to Guyana and he went down to investigate because some of the cult members, family members had went to him and was like, please help us. We're trying to rescue our family members and we're having a hard time. So Congressman Leo Ryan, he went down to Guyana to investigate to see what was really going down. And then once he got down there was a couple of members that went to him and they were like, look, can you help us escape? And the thing I don't understand about this part is one, like, because one cult member slid him a note and basically was like, we want to get out of here, we're trapped, we can't leave, please help us. And then what did the congressman do? He went to Jim Jones and gave him the note and was like, yeah, some of your members want to leave, and he was asking him about that. And that's what made Jim Jones flip, and basically it was like, oh, that's it, they're on to us, they're coming, now we all gotta die. So that's just the Cliff Notes version. That's the brief version of the story. But yeah, very tragic, dark story in American history. So let me play this audio real quick. And when I start playing it, press a one if you can hear it clearly. Because again, this is an account of one of the survivors of the Jonestown massacre. And he's basically telling the story of what he was witnessing on November 18th, 1978. NBC, CBS, ABC. Yeah, so okay. Yeah, we'd like to ask you this first question, and that is, were you there at the time voices took place? I was there for, let's say, 20 minutes or so after it started. Tell us what you saw. Um, there was a general meeting called after the congressman and his party left. And Jones told us that these people wouldn't reach the states. He denounced the people who were members who had left, and told the public there that these people wouldn't reach the states, and that everyone there would commit suicide. And then he asked if there was anyone who dissented. And one lady did get up and say that she didn't think it would possibly happen, and that she didn't agree with it. That was the only thing to do. She felt like we could possibly go to Cuba or Russia or some other place, if we couldn't stay here. And shortly after, a vehicle came back and someone came and talked to him.
And he said it's too late, the people were dead, and he instructed the doctor to bring this poison. Um, How was the poisoning? How was it conducted? Well, they took their equipment into a tent that was used as a library in school, and they brought over syringes, large size syringes, minus the needles, and they had small plastic containers with a liquid solution in it and a large vat of what appeared to be punch, and they would draw up an amount in the syringes, and he had babies and children go first, and they would take the syringe, and the nurse or other people who were administering it would simply put it into the person's mouth, and they would swallow it and then give them a small drink of punch to wash it down. Were people willing to do this? Well, the first person that went up was a young mother. I'd say she was about 27, so she had a small baby, and I'd say the baby was approximately 1.5, something like that. She walked up and just she administered to her own baby, and then she took her home, and then she went over to a field and sat down, and that's it was hard to believe. I could understand older people maybe, but I couldn't understand these young people just doing that. But the question is, were people prodded to go up there? In her case, she wasn't. How about it? And I saw a lot of cases where people went, but at that time it was mostly children, and a lot of children were carried. Babies, that you would carry were taken by parents. Most of them just did. Most of them at that time did go voluntarily. Well, Joe, what did most of the people do? They had taken the poison. Did they lie down? Did they pray? Why were so many found face down? I can't say why they were found face down. They went into convulsions, and at the time that I left.
Let me start right there because that's a key component of the mystery of this story. Because if you look at the pictures of the death scene with all those dead bodies, if you notice, most of the bodies are face down, which doesn't make sense if people were dying because they ingested poison. You would think some would be face down, some would be face up, some might be on their side, some might be like contorted. So that makes me think that their bodies were positioned that way after the death.
They were just laying it on all different different ways. How quickly did they die? 4 or 5 minutes. I could be wrong. I mean, time just kind of lost, any kind of meaning right then. But I'd say 4 to 5 minutes. Are you saying that the bodies, many of them later, were turned over? That's possible. I don't know. The area where they first started going into, there were a lot of babies and children. And when I went back to identify bodies, I didn't go into that area. Was Jones saying what was going through your? Well, he was. Parents were talking to their children and telling them whatever they were telling them, and a lot of the children were crying. And he was telling them not to tell the children that they were dying, not to tell them it was painful. He was telling people it wasn't painful, and that people had to die with dignity. That this was a way of protesting what was happening. That what the people in the United States were doing to the community. This was their way of protesting it. What did he look like at that time, and what did he sound like? That's hard to say because at that time I thought it was all just kind of crazy. I wasn't thinking too clearly. My whole thoughts at the time was I was trying to find a way out, and he sounded very calm. He didn't seem excited. He was very calm. He was sitting in a chair, and he was very calm. Didn't seem excited. You know. Did you see him in a trance? I don't know. I couldn't say that. Why were you different? Why weren't you taken up in all this as the others were? Well, for one, I haven't been with the organization but 2 years, and I never believed wholly in very much of anything, and I couldn't buy a lot of the things that he said. I couldn't buy uh I mean that's just never been my thing. Killing myself. I don't figure that's a way to solve anything. How did you get away? It was there was mass confusion. People were standing around in groups, saying goodbye to each other, walking around hugging old friends and stuff like that. And I walked to a fence, and I was just looking around to see, trying to figure how I could get away because there were guards ringing the place with weapons, and the doctor that was there, he asked someone to get him a stethoscope, and the woman there was the director of the medical department, was standing close, and I told her, I said, Larry needs a stethoscope.
All right, I'll start right there because he's just talking about how he made his escape. But let's get into this. So, Jim Jones, one of the darkest tales in American history. Talking about him. All right. So this video has been sponsored by Elena. Thank you, Elena, for sponsoring this video. And yeah, got excited when you sponsored this video because I'm so fascinated by this story. And like I said, it really tears me up inside. Namely because he used a lot of black people to foster his agenda. So basically, he preyed on the vulnerabilities of black people to ascend to power as a cult leader. So, as a black woman, it really, tears me up inside that, so many black people were bamboozled by this man and were led like lambs to the slaughter. So, Elena has 11 questions, so I'm going to take her questions one by one. But before we get into her questions, let's get into his numerology. So Jim Jones was born on the 13th. So that birth number 13 breaks down to four. And it was said in the early part of his life, he will often wander the streets, sometimes naked. And being naked is very much that four energy because four is like Aquarius. Aquarius is nudity. And the death theme comes with 13 in particular. So 13 is the number of death. It's also a number of regeneration, but the death theme is basically standing out here. And then he was said to be weird and strange ever since he was a child. Now, Icy, you mentioned he has strong American Indian features. He did say that him and his mother have, I think it's Cherokee heritage. And he was a strange looking dude. And then fours can be dictators and tyrants. So him being born on the 13th, again, that breaks down to four, that helped him to become a cult leader because cult leaders are basically dictators, they're tyrants. And then he also has socialistic communistic leanings. So when you want to talk about socialism, communism, that's very Aquarian and that's very four. Also his group affiliations as well. And I believe this whole Jim Jones mass murder slash suicide was a social experiment brought about by our own government, courtesy of the CIA. But I'm not going to get into the whole conspiracy theory too much. I'm just going to be answering Elena's questions. But I do believe that this whole situation was like a social experiment, and that four energy basically points to that. Now his life path number is 23. That breaks down to five. And 23 can be a life where you are highly favored, which he was, not just by his cult members, but even some politicians, which I find to be very suspect. International travel is a major theme. So he started his church, which ended up being a cult, in the United States. He first started in Indiana and then he moved to California, which is long distance travel, which is very 23. But 23 is also international travel. So he moved from California to Guyana when shit started to hit the fan. But he wanted to move there anyway because he wanted to isolate his cult. Also, Jim Jones, his religion fostered diversity and multiculturalism, or I should say his church, his religious cult fostered diversity and multiculturalism. And like I said, he had a lot of black members because he was preying on their vulnerabilities. So here's his chart right here. He is a Taurus, born May 13th, 1931. And I've said it before that Taurus, in my opinion, is the cult leader of the zodiac. And I'll tell you why. Because Taurus is the programmer. Taurus sets the program for other people to follow. So that's number one. If you know anything about tarot, think about the Hierophant card in the tarot deck. The Hierophant card corresponds to Taurus, and the Hierophant is another name for a pope. And basically, the Hierophant, also Taurus, it sets the doctrine. So you've heard of the term indoctrination. That's very Taurus, that's the Hierophant. So Taurus sets the standard for others to follow. And Taurus is also about what is basically supposed to be normal. But Taurus is also about conforming. Taurus is rigid and inflexible, which is what's needed to be an effective cult leader. You can't bend to the wishes of your cult members if you're going to be an effective cult leader. You have to be rigid, inflexible. You have to be stubborn. You have to have these values that you're not going to change just because your cult members are uncomfortable. So let's get that out the way first. Jim Jones being a Taurus, he's the perfect representation of a cult leader, especially with his sun being conjoined to Chiron, because that makes someone feel like they're special, that they've been given a special calling, that they should be the exception to the rule. And then his Mercury is in Taurus as well, which helps. And then he has this Aries stellium. He has North Node, Moon, Uranus, and Venus in Aries in his third house. He's a Capricorn rising with Saturn, his chart ruler, in Capricorn in his first house. And then Saturn is opposing Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. He has Mars and Leo in the eighth, Neptune in Virgo in the eighth, and he has the Libra South Node in the ninth house. Now you see how he got Sagittarius on the 12th house cusp? That right there is the epitome of a religious cult because the 12th house is cults. So again, when I say he's like the epitome of a cult leader, yeah, they basically chose the right person. When I'm saying they, I'm referring to the government because the government has had people like this before. You could think about Charles Manson, which I believe was another government patsy who basically was let to run wild, and he basically had his cult, and number of people ended up dying as a result of the Charles Manson family. Well, Jim Jones, I believe, was another government puppet, government patsy, who was basically used to create this social experiment. And I believe that the purpose was of the social experiment was to see how easy it was to get people to follow someone all the way to their death. All right. So, question one. So, Elena wants to know, she said, was it nature or nurture? Elena has some really good questions. So she asked questions and then she gave a little synopsis. So, was it nature or nurture? Jim grew up in poverty during the Great Depression, but would he have become a maniacal cult leader even if he had a more happy and stable upbringing? Now, I believe he would have become a maniacal cult leader despite his upbringing, but I also believe his upbringing did have a lot to do with how he turns out. So I'm saying that it was a combination of nature and nurture which created this monster. And I believe that's true for all of us. I believe when it comes to who we are as adults, it's a combination of nature and nurture. And you can see it in the chart. So Sun and Chiron in Taurus square Mars and Leo. This square right here is a big reason why he turned out the way he did. This Sun square Mars in particular can produce a person that is prone to always be sowing seeds of discord, who is conflict oriented, who is very egotistical, where their ego gets in the way of their purpose, even. Now, when you see this square, especially because Mars is in his eighth house, this shows that his very essence, represented by his sun, was corrupt. So, somebody like this, if they're born with these squares, Sun and Chiron squaring Mars, even if they're brought up in a wonderful household where they are given everything that they could possibly want, a lot of times they're still going to turn out where they're leaning on the dark side if other factors are taken into consideration, because again, it's all about context as well. But this square can be very hard to overcome in terms of a person trying to do right, especially with that Mars being in the eighth house. So this square produces egomaniac energy, especially with Mars being in Leo. This square made him naturally prone to allow his personal demons to be expressed and to dominate. So his personal demons are represented by Mars and Leo in his eighth house. Eighth house, that's the realm of demons. So in this case, Mars and Leo oftentimes was dominating his sun and Chiron and Taurus. So let's say he didn't have this square, but he still wanted to be a cult leader. If he could still be a cult leader but not be as violent, not be as egotistical if he didn't have this square. But this square makes him a cult leader in the worst way. So this square is basically representing Jim Jones being a malignant narcissist, and it shows where his actions, represented by Mars and Leo, betrayed his image. So he tried to portray this image of this upstanding guy. Hey, Sam. He tried to portray this image of this upstanding guy, this man of values, this man that had these standards, this man that, wanted to help ease people's way. But that Mars and Leo made him want to dominate others, and that Mars and Leo won out over his sun and Chiron and Taurus. Now, with him being a Capricorn rising and Saturn in Capricorn being his chart ruler, this basically means that he was built for hard times and he was built for a life of austerity. So, when you're a Capricorn rising and you got Saturn in Capricorn in your first house, you're basically meant like you're able to live a life of, lean times. You're able to get by on very little. So even if he grew up very poor, which he did, that Capricorn rising helped him to, be able to still sustain through these hard times. But also, when you take into account Saturn and Capricorn ruling his chart and being in the first house, this basically makes him the devil incarnate. Hey, Ellie. So Saturn and Capricorn is representing the devil. So with his Saturn and Capricorn in the first house, again, it would make it hard for him to go the straight and narrow all the time unless he's channeling that Saturnian Capricorn energy into like being a businessman. But even that, then because Saturn is afflicting his Aries stellium, is also opposing Jupiter and Pluto, that can make it hard for him to go to straight and narrow. It can make it really easy for him to become corrupt. But just having that Saturn and Capricorn in the first house alone, that's like him being the devil incarnate. He's the personification of the devil. And he played that role well. Now, Mercury and Taurus trine Capricorn ascendant. This trine made it easy for him to get by on very little. It made him very resourceful and where he could basically make a dollar stretch or what have you. But this also deals with he had relatives looking after him because both of his parents, they really weren't working much. His father spent time in the military, was actually in World War II, and ended up having like post traumatic stress disorder. The father ended up being injured in the war, and that made things hard for him to like just have a normal life and work and assume responsibility. And then the mother, they really didn't go into detail why she wasn't working, but she wasn't really working at all either. So this Mercury and Taurus trine Capricorn ascendant is representing his aunts and uncles who looked after him, with Mercury ruling aunts and uncles. Jones, so this is from Wikipedia. Jones was cared for by the female residents of Lynn, and they frequently gave him food, clothing, and gifts. So he did have some people, take kindly to him and help him out and gave him food and gifts and stuff. So he didn't have it all that bad. So he can't totally blame his upbringing on how he turned out. More about this nature versus nurture. So it says that the family often lacked adequate food and relied on financial support from their extended family. So this is shown with Jim's Saturn in Capricorn opposing Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. And this is namely representing the father being dependent upon extended family members for help with food and even with shelter at one point because they had gotten evicted. And then also the moon is conjoined to the North Node and Uranus in Aries, squaring Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. So that's another aspect that's showing dependency upon the extended family and where they couldn't operate on their own. They couldn't be independent. So Jim Jones learned early on how to rely on others. So when he started his church and later on it became a cult, he had no problem relying on his cult members for money, food, supplies, all of that. Because one of the things that cult leaders do is they be like, you got to turn all your money over and all your possessions over to me. So, growing up in a household where both of his parents really weren't responsible and they weren't really working, he learned, oh, it's okay to be dependent upon other people to get by in life. And then it says, according to multiple Jones biographers, his mother had no natural maternal instincts and she frequently neglected her son. So the mother not having, hey Danny, the mother not having any maternal instincts, that's represented by Moon in Aries, conjoined to Uranus in particular. That Aries, it clashes with Cancer. Cancer is the mother. If you got Moon in Aries, that can represent a mother that doesn't have motherly instincts. And then also, Neptune is running parallel to the asteroid Ceres. Ceres is an asteroid that deals with your relationship with your mother. So the Neptune deals with neglect. So that's that aspect that is really pointing to him being neglected by his mother. But also, like I said, that moon could join to North Node and Uranus in Aries. That's basically representing his mother who lacked that nurturing motherly instinct. And then, especially when you put that square in the mix, so the moon, North Node, and Uranus are squaring Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer, which is representing the mother not really wanting to be a mother at all, and where she pushed her responsibilities off on others. So, mom was extremely selfish and self absorbed, making her adverse to the demands of motherhood. This square also is representing them getting evicted. Moon, in particular, squaring Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. So, at one time, they got evicted and they had to live with family members. And I believe that was the beginning of Jim Jones being abused because these same squares can deal with where you got predators in your own family. You got abusers in your own family. The extended family that was helping you out, some of them are also abusing you. All right, more about nature versus nurture. So it says Jones' father was a disabled world. I'm sorry, I said World War One. World War Two. It's World War One. Jones' father was a disabled World War One veteran who suffered from severe breathing difficulties due to injuries which he sustained in a chemical weapons attack. He tried to augment his income by occasionally working on neighborhood road repair projects because the military pension that he earned was insufficient to support his family. So the father getting busted up in World War One and his lungs being affected by the chemical weapons attack. So that resulted in him having severe breathing issues. That's dealing with Mercury conjoined to Arabic part of danger or peril. And also Mercury conjoined to Arabic part of the father. And Mercury is in the fourth house representing the father. And then this Arabic part is basically bringing the father out into the open. Now, because Mercury's in the fourth house and it's conjoined to the Arabic part of danger, Arabic part of the father, this is basically representing Jim Jones absorbing his father's mental instability that resulted from being in the war. So, Jim Jones, he's a perfect example of how your parents have so much to do with how you're going to turn out as a child. And when you have planets in the fourth house, a lot of times you are going to be conditioned by your early upbringing, especially like a planet like Mercury, where he's like his mind is so conditioned by his early upbringing, but even in particular his father, that he has a hard time thinking on his own or separating that trauma that his father experienced. He totally absorbed it with Mercury being in the fourth house, if that makes sense. And then Neptune was running contraparallel to the asteroid Minerva. And then Neptune was conjoined to Pallas. Both Pallas and Minerva are asteroids that often pertain to one's relationship with their father, especially in terms of a person trying to gain their father's approval. So when I think about Neptune being in his eighth house, it makes me wonder if his own father was sexually abusing him. So his father, again, he wasn't working and he was a drunk. So I'm wondering if during those times when his father got drunk, which would be represented by that Neptune, I wonder if his father was sexually abusing him. And then the fact that Jim Jones has Saturn running parallel to Eros could also pertain to his father sexually abusing him because Eros is an asteroid of lust. Saturn rules the father. But also, Jim Jones had Pluto in Cancer opposing Fortuna in Capricorn. So this opposition is also representing the father depending upon others for support, financial support. But again, here's that Saturn parallel Eros. And with Eros being in Virgo, this could be where, the father might have looked to Jim Jones to service him sexually when he was drunk. And I don't think this is far fetched because you got to think about Jim Jones. Again, he was wandering the streets sometimes naked. And that can be a trauma response. That could be a response from sexual trauma in particular, where you're just like in a zombie like state and you don't even know like what the hell you're doing. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was going on. I'm almost certain he was being abused by extended family members, but I even venture to say he was being abused by his father as well. And let me see what else I want to say about this. Oh, it was something that Mars and Leo in the eighth house too. That can kind of speak to some type of abuse from the father, and it could be sexual as well. But there was something else I was going to talk about with that father. But if I remember, I'll mention it. Oh, Marceline. So Marceline was his wife, and Elena wanted to know. She said, "What was his genuine relationship with his late wife, Marceline Baldwin, like? Did he have any care for her at all, or was she merely a cardboard cutout for him to display his pious and religious image?" So when we want to consider his wife, we got to look to the seventh house, right? Because seventh house, that's your marriage partner. So he has Cancer on the seventh house cusp. So that would make the moon the ruler of his seventh house. The moon is in Aries, conjoined to the Aries North Node and Uranus, and it's opposing the Libra South Node. So my answer is no. He did not care for Marceline at all beyond what she could do for him because that Aries is representing he needed a wife to basically make him look better or to fulfill some type of purpose in terms of his identity. So, totally selfish motives concerning his wife. You can look at that moon in Aries rule in the seventh house. And with it being in the third house, it can mean that it was a conscious decision on his part. It had nothing to do with love. So, when you take the conjunction between his moon and Uranus into account, is akin to Marceline being a cardboard cutout for him to display his religious image, especially when the opposition with the ninth house Libra South Node is taken into account. Now, when you have your South Node in Libra, it's real easy to get married, find yourself in committed relationships, but that's not really what you need to focus too much on this lifetime. So, Jim Jones, he basically did this in the extreme way where, yeah, he got married, but it was all for his own selfish motives, like purely for his own selfish motives. The South Node in Libra in the ninth house, that ninth house is religion. So it's showing that, yes, he got married in order to display religious piety or just to make himself look good in terms of being a religious leader. Also, can be representative of Marceline being his beard. And he had Moon conjoined to Sappho. Sappho is an asteroid that often pertains to homosexuality. So it was spoken that he was having sex with the males and the females in his cult, but I think he had more of a attraction to males than females, which can be seen with this Aries energy ruling that seventh house. Also, with the moon conjunct Uranus, this makes him inclined towards polyamory, where his wife is not the only one. So again, he was spreading himself around to all the cult members, the women, the men, and with the moon conjunct Uranus, that is basically like, hey, we gonna have this polyamorous type of hookup. We gonna be very unify in terms of this whole relationship thing. And with Moon conjunct Uranus, that can also mean that he expected his wife to be tolerant of his different hookups, of his different affairs. Also, with the Moon being in Aries, I would say that a lot of his anger was directed towards his wife and the family that he created with her. Now, he only had one child with her, one biological child, but they ended up adopting children, you know, as a result of them creating this cult. Well, him creating this cult. And then he has Venus and Uranus squaring Saturn and Capricorn, which is basically representing that he really couldn't connect with any woman in terms of love. And it was all about control for him. So even though he was having sex with these women, I see it as more of a means of control than he actually had this sexual attraction to women. He was more sexually attracted to men than anything else. And then Juno opposing the midheaven, this is him going after other people's partners and where he got married just for the sake of his reputation. Ellie said he looks like a typical 80s downtown gay conservative male. Mm-hmm. Yep. Ellie said, hold up, why is he holding those two monkeys in the thumbnail? Well, I picked that image because it just shows how manipulative he is. And you can see like this devilish look on his face. Like he wanted to be a puppet master for those two monkeys. And that's how he looked at his cult members. He was like this puppet master for them. But he used to sell these monkeys, and that's how he was able to recruit a female cult member because she wrote to him because he put an ad in the paper with that picture and he was offering these monkeys up for sale. And she contacted him, and next thing you know, she becomes one of his cult members. Easy con game. So, question number 3. So Elena wants to know, does his birth chart reveal just how he was able to so easily convince over 900 members of his church to abandon their families to serve his tyrannical whims? So remember I said he has Sagittarius on the 12th house cusp. That's the epitome of a religious cult. And then we have to look at Jupiter because Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So Jupiter, ruler of the 12th house, is conjoined to Pluto in Cancer in the 7th house, which can deal with the people that he was able to attract were extremely impressionable, especially on an emotional level, where he was able to, and he was also able to impress upon their psyche, represented by Pluto, and basically get their loyalty, their devotion that way. That Jupiter ruling the 12th and being in the 7th made him very, like, he had this hypnotic effect upon some people. And some people viewed him as a savior and a redeemer. And he preyed upon people's neediness. So he was basically recruiting people who were drug addicts, alcoholics, people who were homeless, people who got kicked out of their homes, a lot of black people who were suffering from racism, lack of employment opportunities, poverty, all that. So he was preying upon people's neediness, represented by that Cancer energy. And then the moon, North Node, and Uranus in Aries. Remember, the moon is ruling that 7th house. It's in trine with Mars and Leo, which made him a natural leader. And it made it easy for these people to look up to him as a leader. And not just a leader, but also a father. And a lot of these people were looking for father figures. The fact that his Saturn is in Capricorn in his first house, opposing Jupiter and Pluto, is him basically being a father figure for his flock. Like that Jupiter conjunct Pluto in Cancer is representing his flock. So him being the father figure for them. And then remember, he got Mercury conjoined to the Arabic part of the father, which also made him speak like a father and made people trust him to play this fatherly role in their life. So he also has a grand trine in his chart involving Mercury and Taurus, trine Neptune and Virgo. Neptune is in trine with his Capricorn ascendant, and Mercury is in trine with the Capricorn ascendant. So again, that whole father theme, people trusting him basically the way he would speak, he spoke very like in this fatherly tone, and he would say stuff like, "Okay, dear, I love you." Like he would be speaking like he was the personification of the heavenly father, basically. And with Mercury trine Neptune in particular, that was like he was able to hypnotize people through his speech. He was able to mesmerize people through his speech. He was a smooth talker. I would say he was probably even engaging in what is called neuralistic programming, where you're using certain gestures to make yourself come across as more believable, more impactful. And he was doing the faith healing too, which is represented by Mercury trine Neptune. So he was doing the things, how those charlatans, scam artists, preachers be doing, where a person be in a wheelchair and he's like, "Get up and walk. I command you to walk." And the person walks, but it's all a scam. It's all a con. So that Mercury trine Neptune enabled him to get over on others by using faith healing, again, talking all smooth to people. And somebody like that, they just know what to say because they are rather intuitive. So they'll be able to zero in on people's vulnerabilities and say things to pull them in and make them feel safe. He had Pluto running parallel to Cupido, and Cupido is at the 10th degree of Cancer. So with this Pluto parallel Cupido, I see this as him using race, or where he's basically touting racial empowerment, because again, he targeted black people in particular. So he's using racial empowerment to gain unwavering love and adoration. And that's one thing about black people. Black people will stick with your ass if it seems like you are, supporting them and you got their back and you're leading them. So he basically secured their undying devotion, their unwavering love and adoration by basically touting this whole black empowerment, which is really sick. And also him showing love to the throwaways of society. Pluto represents the throwaways of society, the dregs of society, the downtrodden, the people that, people look down upon. So he was basically showing love to those throwaways of society, and that helped him as well to easily convince 900 plus members. And then he had Mercury parallel Amor. So speaking words of love also helped to capture the hearts and minds of his followers. So many. But he had help from the government. Trust and believe he had help from the government because he was going on bus tours across the country. And this is when he just had his church in Indiana. I don't even think he was in California yet, or maybe he was. But first of all, you already know being a preacher, especially being a preacher of people of low income, you're not going to make that much money. So you got to ask yourself, how was he getting all this money? And I would even say, even with the donations that the church members were giving him, even when they were giving him his whole paycheck, I'm like, how did you get all the money to travel cross country multiple times on a bunch of Greyhound buses that you chartered to spread your gospel? He was doing that with the help of the government. And you could see that with the Capricorn energy in his chart, him being a Capricorn rising, Saturn and Capricorn in his first house. He was basically doing the government's bidding. Mercury conjoined to Arabic part of father, like I said. So, on one hand, this is dealing with his actual father, but then later on, he was able to use this energy to be this father figure to others and to even speak like a father. And punishment also comes with fathers as well. So he wasn't a totally loving father. He was loving in the beginning just to pull them in, but then he started to become the big time disciplinarian type of father. Question number 4: fear based mind control. So, fear of external threats. Jones would constantly berate members with tall tales of being captured and tortured by government officials to create a us versus them outlook to discourage anyone who may decide to leave the church. So he kept his cult members in fear. Yes, Francois. And this is how you know he was basically propped up by the government to do this because he got the mayor, I forget the mayor's name. I actually wrote these notes. Hold on, let me go to what wait a minute, let me go to that part. I'm glad you mentioned that part. So he got Mayor George Moscone elected. And how did he get him elected? Because he would send his cult members out door to door to tell the people, vote for vote for George Moscone. So with the help of Jim Jones, George Moscone became the mayor. And then he appointed Jim Jones to be the chairman of the city housing authority. So again, it's just showing that Jim Jones was not operating on his own. He basically was a government patsy. He was a tool of the government. Yes, Sam, but he was presenting himself as being against the government. But he really was operating with the government. Now, one thing you got to understand about conspiracies dealing with government, there's this term called compartmentalization. So, compartmentalization meaning the government could be using you as a puppet, but you don't even realize it. Like you realize you got connections in government, you realize you got some politicians in your back pocket, but you don't understand the whole scope of it. You don't see the whole picture. I don't believe that he knew he was going to be a casualty in this whole experiment. I think he thought that they were going to pull him out before everybody got massacred or while everybody was getting massacred. I believe that he thought government officials was going to pull him out and he was going to survive it. But the joke was on him at the end of the day. But anyway, same with Charles Manson. I believe Charles Manson, he knew he was under government control, but he didn't realize that he was going to be sacrifice his freedom in the end. All right, where are we at? Okay, so fear of external threats. Jones would constantly berate members with tall tales of being captured and tortured by government officials to create an us versus them outlook to discourage anyone who might decide to leave the church. So this is represented by Saturn in Capricorn in his first house, opposing Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. You're going to see this opposition come up a number of times because it's one of the main aspects that's representing a lot that went down. And again, Saturn in Capricorn is representing the government, but it's also representing fear that he is fostering in his cult members. Mercury conjunct Arabic part of danger or peril. So this conjunction comes up again where he's speaking, he's talking about people being in danger or they're coming to get us. We gotta go. We gotta move. We gotta. Because first it started where they moved to California and then the heat got on him through this reporter. This reporter was going to do this expose on him. And then he was like, oh, we got to go to Guyana because they're on to us. They're going to shut us down. They're going to try to, thwart our plans. And then Uranus in Aries, sesqui square Neptune in Virgo. This is representing this one time when he was giving one of his sermons. And I think this was when he was still in California. I know this was before he went to Guyana. So one time he was preaching and he held up a Bible and he threw it across the room and everybody gasped because these are so-called Christians and they believe in the Bible. And he was basically doing that to show like you don't need to have faith in an unseen God anymore. Don't even have faith in this Bible. And he used black people as an example. He was like, this book, this Bible has been used to keep black people down for years. And he basically was like, don't rely on the Bible. Don't rely on this unseen God. Rely on what you can see. And he was basically like, I'll be your God. I'll be your father. I'll be whatever you want me to be. But this was his way of scaring them because, oh, and he also said this is where the Uranus part comes in too. The Uranus is him throwing the Bible. And as you see, Uranus is in his third house. Third house is the Bible. Uranus is throwing. But then it's also representing what he said about the lightning. So once he threw the Bible, he was like, see, did God send a lightning bolt to strike me down? He was like, that just shows you that God, the unseen God, has no power. He was like, I have all the power. And he was like, you can consider me to be whatever you want. And basically, that was his way of striking fear in them, shocking them into submission, and basically teaching them that, look, you can't even rely on this unseen God because I can do this to the Bible and nothing happened to me. Crazy dude. Oh, keep in mind that he got two planets that are stationary in his chart. Mercury is stationary, and stationary means that when it's in that state between retrograde and direct. And then Neptune station and Mercury station. When you got station planets, that's like an over intensification of that energy. And it can be very problematic. It basically is just showing that the person is very fixed in terms of how they see things. They are very inflexible. So that just, contributed to his ability to be a cult leader. Humiliation rituals. Yeah, Alex, he was scary for real. And he even looks scary. And this is where I'm like, that whole saying where don't judge a book by its cover. Hey, don't believe that. You should judge a book by its cover because some people, they look like the demon that they are. And he definitely looked like the demon that he is or was. All the way down to that smirk on his face. That's that moon conjunct Uranus. Now, public humiliation rituals. Anyone who questioned the cult leader's authority would immediately be subjected to mock trials and forced false confessions to break down their self worth and further discourage them from leaving, making an example of traitors. He was not above recruiting small children as spies. So again, we got to go back to Jupiter, ruler of the 12th house, because 12th house is humiliation. It's also secrets. So Jupiter, ruler of the 12th house, can join a Pluto. That's basically exposing these members. And then also the square to the Libra South Node, that's representing the mock trials and basically airing people's dirty laundry. So basically, he had a system where if you were doing wrong, he would take you in front of everybody and he would get people to expose you. Like he'd be like, "Oh, this person was caught having sex with this person, or this person was caught masturbating, or this person was doing this." Basically, shaming people, humiliating them. And then Jupiter in Cancer was in semi square with Neptune in Virgo. So this semi square is also representing the humiliation as well, especially the sexual humiliation with Neptune being in that eighth house. And then Jupiter contra parallel Pandora. So Pandora can represent whistleblowers. Pandora is an asteroid that deals with basically when you spill the tea, or where you let the cat out the bag, or where you basically unleash things that cannot be put back. In this case, it's representing the whistleblowers that were basically snitching on each other. And then Saturn is running parallel to the asteroid Clisha. And Clisha is an asteroid that can pertain to rumors, hearsay, and basically he said, she said type of stuff where people end up getting hurt as a result. And because Clisha is in Leo, this can also represent the children that he recruited as spies. And then, furthermore, about the children recruiting that he recruited as spies, that's seen through his Aries stellium trining his Mars in Leo, Leo ruling children. That Mars in the eighth house is being a spy. Now the moon, North Node, and Uranus is representing the conditioning of children to be spies by creating a hive mentality. So let's go back to Cancer on the 7th, with the moon ruling the 7th, the moon being in Aries, conjoined to the North Node and Uranus. It's the Uranus in particular that's producing this hive mentality, this hive mind. Oh, Clisha, KL. I might not even be pronouncing it right because it's like a Greek name. It might be Clatia or Clisha. Klytia. Sometimes it's spelled Clytia. But basically, it's about this woman that wanted this man, but he was already married. And then she had an affair, and then she went to tell the father of the wife, and then she got struck down. So it's like when you open your mouth, but then it ends up backfiring on you. That's basically what the mythology is about. But it can also like hearsay, rumors, someone spreading gossip. But again, where it sometimes bites you in the ass. So again, that moon conjunct Uranus is representing the hive mentality that most of his followers had, and that's what he was basically wanting. And especially with it being in the third house where they all had one mind. And that's how he was able to totally control them and get them to snitch on each other, especially the children. And then the moon, North Node, and Uranus are conjoined to the asteroid Hebe. Hebe deals with youth, so it deals with children. So, on one hand, this is representing him being able to have the children under his control where they're reporting to him. But on the other hand, this is representing violence towards children because they would be whooping those children's asses. And they did that to instill fear in children to not disobey them. But this can also have sexual implications as well. Because I don't know if y'all remember me saying this, but Hebe is one of the asteroids that can represent a child predator, if you know what I mean. I'm pretty sure he was touching the children too because he was trying to get on everybody. Breaking the spirit. So question number 6. Severe sleep deprivation and exhaustion. So members of the church were forced to work long, grueling hours with little to no sleep at all, a poor diet, and constant surveillance, keeping them in a constant state of brain fog, disrupted critical thinking. So again, Sagittarius on the 12th cusp. Now, when you got Sagittarius on the 12th house, Hebe, when you got Sagittarius on the 12th house, that alone can make it hard to sleep. Because Sagittarius, that's a sign of insomnia. But in this case, this is representing the cult members, but it's also representing sleep too. So Jupiter, ruler of the 12th house, conjoined to Pluto in Cancer. Remember, Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer is representing these followers, these cult members. Opposing Saturn and Capricorn. Saturn and Capricorn, that's them having to work all the time, long hours, being denied sleep due to working long hours. And then even his Neptune in Virgo, that's basically a cult that has to work a lot. That's forced to work with Neptune being in that eighth house. Then he had Uranus in Aries, sesqui square Neptune in Virgo. So this sesqui square is representing the white knights. So he had these white knight rituals where he would like blare like a air horn, not an air horn. What are those things called where it'd be like, "Wah?" It'd be that long. It's so traumatizing sounding, but it's like a long alarm type of horn. And then I think he would turn on like bright lights, and then he would be having his speeches broadcasted over a loudspeaker all night long. So you couldn't even sleep because you're hearing his voice over a loudspeaker, and you're hearing this, horn just blaring, and you're thinking it's Armageddon. You're thinking it's the end of time. You're thinking it's the last day. But yeah, and keeping them in a constant state of brain fog, that's represented by Uranus and Aries sesqui square Neptune in Virgo as well, with Aries representing the brain and Uranus represents the collective. And like I said, with that moon conjoined to Uranus, it's like the followers all had one mind. And then he had, oh, and also Moon, North Node, and Jupiter. I mean, Moon, North Node, and Uranus in Aries, squaring Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. So, this is where he's keeping them from thinking and operating independently. So, again, it's like no way out, not even mentally for a lot of these people because he has so much influence upon their mind. And then Neptune running parallel to Echo. Echo is an asteroid that means exactly what it says, so it can deal with things that are echoing. So this is the repeated playing of recordings as a grooming or training mechanism. And he had them sing certain songs over and over again. Like This Man Has Power, I think was one of the songs. Let me see if I wrote that down. It was something like one of the songs that he had them singing was "This man has the all the power" or something like that. But anyway, you know, having people repeat things over and over again or playing things over and over again, that is a form of brainwashing, mind control. All right, question number 7. Isolation as a means of total control. So how he isolated his cult following from the outside world, basically encouraging them not to speak to coworkers or schoolmates about the happenings inside the people's temple. So this is represented by the T square in his chart. And of course, it's involving Jupiter again. Jupiter is a big part of his issues. Remember, I said that whole opposition between his Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto is going to keep resurfacing because that had a lot to do with who he became and what he was doing with these cult members. So there's a T square in his chart involving Jupiter and Pluto, Saturn and Capricorn, and Venus and Uranus in Aries. And this is basically where he's keeping them contained into this world that he created, a world that takes them away from the outside world. And in this world that he created for them, they had everything. So they even had doctors, they had, like school, they had school. They didn't have to rely on the outside world for anything. They even, especially when they moved down to Guyana, but even in California, they had their own farm. So they were growing crops and stuff like that. So they didn't have to rely on the outside world for any help. And then, of course, Jupiter ruling that 12th house is isolation. Isolation just comes naturally when it comes to cults. You have to isolate them because you can't have outside influences taking them away from the cult. And then Jupiter contra parallel Pandora. So this Pandora comes up again because this is where he's warning people not to spill the tea. He's basically warning people that if you become a whistleblower, you either going to get killed or severely punished. And he would punish people harshly, severely. He would humiliate them in front of the other members if they did talk about escaping or leaving. And there's one incident with this older black man that was recorded where Jim Jones is putting him on trial, and he's like, yeah, someone told me that you wanted to leave. And then the old man, he's like, oh, no, no. He was like, I don't want to leave. He was like, I just wanted to visit my family during Christmas. And he was like, well, you could go visit your family if you want. And he was like, I'm not saying you can't stay. But he said it in a way where he was like, but if you leave, you're going to be killed. He basically said it like that. Like, I'm not forcing you to stay, but if you leave, that's your life. But then this Jupiter contra parallel Pandora is also representing the time. Remember, I told you when the congressman Leo Ryan, and it's interesting, Jim Jones got Mars and Leo in his chart, which could represent Leo Ryan, the congressman that came to investigate, especially with Mars being the eighth house. Eighth house is investigation. But this Jupiter contra parallel Pandora is also representing the time when a couple of cult members came to the congressman and was like, look, we're trying to leave. He won't let us leave. Can you help us? Because again, remember, Pandora represents a whistleblower. And then a lot of times with Pandora, once you let out the truth, all hell breaks loose, which is exactly what happened soon after they went to the congressman and asked for help. I feel like the congressman set them up. Like, and this is too, again, going back to the whole compartmentalization theory with these government conspiracies. If we're talking about the congressman Leo Ryan, who went to Guyana to investigate on behalf of family members who had family members in the cult, I'm thinking it could have been one of two things. Congressman Leo Ryan could have really had pure intentions where he really wanted to help these family rescue the cult members. And he got caught up. He became a sacrifice. CIA. Or it could have been where Congressman Leo Ryan was just doing this to basically get some clout for rescuing people, and he basically really was out for his own selfish interest, and he got caught up in the process. Mind you, again, he got killed trying to rescue these people. No, he didn't even try to rescue them. Actually, he got killed going back to the plane. He didn't even really try to rescue the people, but I think he was like, come with me or whatever, like that. But again, if you really are trying to help people, why would you go directly to the source? Why would you go to the monster and tell him, these people just slipped me this note. They're trying to get out of here. Why won't you let them leave? It's like it's almost like he was set up to get everything on and popping with the mass murder. So it was either that where he was set up to get everything on and popping, or he went there with pure intentions and he ended up being a sacrifice. He ended up being a casualty. And where, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself because this story is so like intricate and convoluted. So, okay, because I'm trying to tell you my thought process with this. So, again, it could have been one of two things. So, it could have been where the CIA set Congressman Ryan up to go down there to get things on and popping. Like maybe he was going to serve as the catalyst for the massacre. Or it could have been where Leo Ryan had pure intentions and again he got caught up. He didn't realize this was a CIA operation And once it got out in the open, once they knew Leo Ryan was going down there, maybe that's when they was like, we got to shut this operation down. Let's do the massacre now. So I think it was either one of those two things. But I don't mean to confuse y'all. As you could tell, I'm very vested in this story. Test of faith. Fake self delete threats. Now, Jones would trick his followers into drinking various liquids, stating it was poison to test their loyalty and to see who would fiercely obey without question, only to reveal that it was merely water or juice. Now, a lot of y'all probably heard of that term, drink the Kool Aid, don't drink the Kool Aid. Well, this is where it comes from. This story, Jim Jones, People's Temple Massacre. So basically, he would trick people into thinking that they drunk the poison. I'm sorry, Ellie. You said too late. I'm very confused. I know I wish I could just show the documentary and then give my commentary, but again, YouTube's not going to allow that, or else it would be so much clearer. But so basically, he was a doomsday cult leader. And he said that if the authorities ever come down on them, he would rather them take their own lives by drinking poison than to be captured by the authorities. So that's the gist of it. So before the actual massacre, there would be times when Jim Jones would pass out Kool-Aid or water and have them drink it. And then after they drank it, he would be like, that was poison and everybody's about to die. And everybody would start flipping out and screaming and crying and stuff. And then he would be like, no, he was like, I was just testing you. He was like, it wasn't poison. It was just juice or water. But it was like he was doing that to prepare them. Now, Mercury and Taurus trine Neptune and Virgo, that was his ability to even just get them to drink what they thought might be poison, to get them to even go along with it and agree with it. And that made him really good at lying too. And then Saturn and Capricorn opposing Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. I told you this opposition is going to keep coming up because, again, this is him fostering fear that the government is coming after them, the authorities is coming after them, and they better just kill themselves. They better just have this mass suicide. And then Venus conjoined to Nessus, Uranus parallel Nessus. Nessus is an asteroid that pertains to poison. So it's showing up right here that yes, he was basically using this whole tale of, oh yeah, this liquid got poison in it, you're about to die. And then ultimately, the final liquid actually did have poison in it. It had cyanide in it. So most of the people that died at the People's Temple in Guyana, they died through cyanide poisoning. But that's not how Jim Jones died. He didn't die from cyanide poisoning, which is also suspect. Divine sexual authority. Question number 9. Medical and sexual control. Jim also distributed medications, both real and placebo, controlling who received what, while also claiming divine sexual authority using sexual abuse to coerce members to prove their loyalty. So Mercury and Taurus trine Neptune and Virgo, that made it really easy to get his hands on drugs. And he did have a doctor in the cult. He had a whole little, pharmacy going on. So he had easy access to drugs. And then that can even make it easy for him to coax people into taking drugs. And then Moon, North Node, Uranus, and Aries trine Mars and Leo. This made him basically be able to have sex with whoever he wanted. That gave him free reign to basically get on top of anybody. And then Sun, ruler of the eighth house, conjoined to Chiron and Taurus, sextile Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. With this sextile, it showed that he may have played favorites with the members who were very sexually compliant, which makes me think of this one guy that there was two guys, they were brothers, and they were high up in the cult. Like they were part of the what would you say, elders, or they were basically his henchmen. So I'm thinking that he was probably regularly having sex with them, and that's why they were given the high position in the cult. And they were two of the members that made it out alive, and they made it out with a suitcase full of money, which I think was intended for Jim Jones, because I think Jim Jones thought he was going to make it out alive, but ha ha, they shot him in the head. Not the brothers, but someone shot him in the head. Could have been some CIA operative. But anyway, I'm thinking with the Sexel that he may have played favorites with the members, because Taurus is favoritism, may have played favorites with the members who were very sexually compliant. And also, this can show where he basically normalized sex with members of the People's Temple cult. This also enabled him to have them more attached to him. Because you know what they say, when you have sex with somebody, you're creating that bond, you're creating the soul tie. And then Nessus comes up again. So Venus conjoined to Nessus, Uranus parallel Nessus. Nessus deals with poison, but it also deals with predators, sexual predators in particular. So it shows right here, yes, he was a sexual predator, especially to people who were trying to be more independent. That's how he would basically subdue them. There was this one guy, and it's actually one of his henchmen. In the documentary, he says, yeah, one time Jim Jones walked up to me and he whispered in my ear, if you want me to fuck you in the ass, I will. Just say the word. And the cult member, he claimed that he, didn't take Jim Jones up on that offer, but I'm almost certain he did. First of all, the cult member telling the story, he seemed like he was gay, like on the down low. So I'm like, yeah, you was giving it up probably frequently to Jim Jones for you to have that high position. So he basically partially told the truth. Yeah, Jim Jones said that, but you basically complied. Now, when Jim Jones would suggest certain things, I'm sure people really didn't have much of a choice. Either you was going to do it or he was just going to take it. You was going to give it up voluntarily or he was going to take it. And that Venus conjoined the Nessus, Uranus parallel Nessus points to that. Uranus in particular is representing his penchant for gay men. He basically, I believe he preferred to have sex with men than women. There was even this account where this one cult member, one of the survivors, he said one time they had a meeting and it was all the men. And he said, for everyone that wants Jim Jones to fuck them up the ass, you have to take an enema first. If you don't believe me, watch this documentary. Like I said, I'm going to leave the link in the description section after this live stream. But check out this documentary because this documentary is like raw. Again, I'm going to repeat it. He said, Jim Jones is telling y'all that if y'all want him to fuck you up the ass, you got to take an enema first because he don't like having sex with shitty asses. And then the guy said, all right, so everybody who's had sex with Jim Jones, who's let Jim Jones fuck you up the ass, raise your hand. And he said most of the men in the cult raised their hand. Yeah, he wanted them to be clean. That's that Neptune in Virgo in the eighth house. That's the enema right there. And then again, Saturn parallel Eros. This is basically him using sex as a means of control to get them to submit, which is that Virgo. Yeah, and you notice with these cult members, usually, I'm not cult members, cult leaders, usually sex always comes into play. So think about it. The cult leader, I always say Taurus is the cult leader. Taurus opposes Scorpio. Makes a lot of sense. Eventually, they're going to resort to using sex as a means of control, but also they might just be using sex to satisfy their own pleasures or desires. And again, I believe Jim Jones was more gay than straight. or even more gay than bisexual. So I believe he was primarily having sex with women just as a means of control, and he was having sex with men more so for pleasure, but also as a means of control too. Countdown to Armageddon. Question number 10. The end is nigh. Hey, conservative, you said one person with all that power is sad. When people are looking for someone to worship or looking to be led by someone or something, it is really sad. And this is why you got to be careful of following these so called representatives of God. Oh, yeah, Chris Jack. I think David Koresh probably was also a government puppet, too. I can't remember if he was a Taurus, though. But just think about Hitler. Hitler was a Taurus. And did you know Jim Jones, he followed the teachings of Hitler? Like he studied, hey, Kawhi, he studied Hitler to learn how to be a very influential speaker. Because, when Hitler would speak, the masses, the crowds in Germany, they would be mesmerized. So he learned a lot of his speaking techniques through Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was a Taurus. And you might as well say Adolf Hitler was a cult leader. He was a cult leader of the Nazis. All right, so the end is nigh. Followers were led to believe that they were about to face Armageddon and that only Jim Jones could absolve them of their sins. He claimed death was a noble act of resistance, not a form of self delete. Alina says, sorry, I'm doing the best I can with my wording so that your channel doesn't get a strike. Oh, I'm not going to get a strike. What will happen is I'll get demonetized, but I don't care. This is a sponsored video. This is part of the reason why I do these video sponsorships, because YouTube will demonetize me for the littlest reason. So when somebody sponsors a video, I feel more at liberty to speak how I want. So if you notice, I haven't been holding back. I haven't been censoring myself when I'm talking about this stuff for the most part, because I already know they're going to demonetize me just off of the subject matter alone. But that's okay, because the bulk of my bread and butter does not come from YouTube. I don't depend on YouTube to put food on my table. I couldn't even if I wanted to. But anyway, so number 10. The end is nigh. Followers were led to believe they were about to face Armageddon and that only Jim Jones could absolve them of their sins. He claimed death was a noble act of resistance, not a form of self delete. Instead of self delete, how about saying self annihilation? Now, which he used to ultimately justify the massacre in Guyana. So that T square comes up again, involving his Venus and Uranus and Aries in his third house, Saturn and Capricorn in his first house, and Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. This is that whole doomsday, the walls are closing in on us. We gonna have to take our own lives type of energy. Mars and Leo trine Aries stellium. Now, this is the aspect where he's basically saying, welcome to Mars. Go SETI. Thank you for becoming a diggable planet. Shout out to you. Thank you. But this one right here, Mars and Leo in the eighth. Remember, eighth house is death. Trine Aries stellium. So Leo is the sign of free will. So this is where it's showing that death via one's own free will and volition is preferable to being captured. Basically, like, this is the ultimate form of being in charge of your destiny, being able to take yourself out before someone else does it, or before you get captured, or what have you. So this just also shows you that Jim Jones was quite comfortable with taking his own life. Maybe not at that time, but at least, he spoke it, he preached it. And especially with Mars being co-ruler of that third house, he talked about it all the time. Like, he said, death, women, let me read the quote. He said, give us our liberty or give us death. We choose our death and no one chooses it for us. That right there, that's Mars and Leo in the eighth, trine Aries stellium. Because with that Aries stellium. Remember, the moon rules the seventh house. So he's not just talking about his own death, he's talking about the death of him and his followers. He's like, y'all all coming with me. But again, I don't think he believed that he was going to die that day. I think he was thought that he was going to make it out with the other survivors and that he would carry on, maybe to continue on with the cult or whatever. But like I said, I believe he was a CIA puppet and they basically took him out because the experiment at that point was over. They had already fulfilled their purpose. Saturn in Capricorn opposing Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. Again, that's where he's fostering fear. The government is after us. The authorities are coming. It's time to drink the Kool-Aid. But it actually wasn't even Kool-Aid. Yeah, that's what I was saying, Kay. I was saying exactly that. Um, it was actually flavor aid that they used. But again, it was laced with cyanide, and once that congressman was killed, he held a meeting around 6 p.m. in the evening, and he was like, okay, the congressman, he was like, he's dead. And he was like, okay, now they're really coming after us. And now we all have to drink this Kool-Aid or flavor aid. Now we got to drink it. And that's when everybody started to flip out. You can actually hear the recording in the documentary. And then there's an extended version of the recording on another YouTube video. I couldn't find that. But yeah, that one is really gut wrenching and it's traumatic to hear because there's this one woman that's pleading with Jim Jones to change his mind. She's like, we don't have to take this extreme, we don't have to resort to this extreme measure by killing ourselves. You said we were going to move to the Soviet Union if things started to, get hot. And he was like, oh, no, no. He was like, this is the time. He was telling people to die with dignity. And he was saying stuff like, mother, 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 get your children, get your children. Don't tell them that they're about to die. He was like, death is just another plane of existence. Like he was really trying to coax, not even coax, compel them into taking their own lives. But I think the majority ended up being forced to drink the poison. Some of them went willingly, but I think the majority of them went forcibly. And then Pluto opposition Hidalgo. Hidalgo is basically representing a priest or a preacher. And it's basically representing that, yes, his message as a preacher was about death and being okay with death, especially if the authorities are coming down on you. And then lastly, we have question number 11. Did Jim Jones' drug addiction open the portal to demonic influences that may have encouraged him to tread down this dark path? Or was it mostly due to his innate cruel nature and free will? So let's examine that real quick. So I feel like Jim Jones was like a demon in the flesh. You got certain types of demonic activity. You got demonic oppression. You got demonic attacks. You got demonic infestation. You got demonic attachment. I believe with Jim Jones, it was more so demonic attachment, but even more so than that, where he was basically a demon in the flesh. Like his essence was demonic, which you could see with the sun ruling his eighth house, because he got Leo in the eighth house cuts, and the sun being in Taurus. That's like the epitome of demonic possession. And especially with the sun being in the fourth house, because that can mean that he's operating more so on unconscious drives than anything else. He's not really operating of his own free will and volition when you take that eighth house into account. Someone is motivating him, and it's basically a demonic entity. Now, also with Neptune at the second degree of Virgo in the eighth house, that's like him being a host for demons, or where he is a demon is like integrated totally within him. Neptune rules his third house. Third house is your conscious mind. This is like a demon basically getting inside his head, or where, the demon is, he's the demon is speaking through him, you could basically say. Co-rule of the second house. Now also, Neptune rules drugs, right? He got Pisces on the third house cuts and it's co-rule of the second. So with Neptune being in the eighth, that could be drug induced demonic activity. So when he gets high, the demon comes out in full force, you can say. The demon is able to be unleashed. But I would say that demon was out anyway, but you could say maybe the demon becomes even more bolder with the drug use. Now, Saturn in Capricorn opposing Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. This part right here, I'm looking at his father is the one that created the demon. This goes back to his father. And again, this is why it's so important about who your parents are. Your parents can fuck you up, like in terms of who they are, what they went through, and it shows in the chart. So his father, represented by Saturn in Capricorn, and remember, Capricorn rising, Saturn is his chart ruler, meaning he really embodied the energy of his father with Saturn being in the first house. Remember, his father was in the military. His father served in World War One. His father got injured. More than likely, his father had post traumatic stress disorder. Okay, which can be seen by Saturn in Capricorn opposing Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer. When you want to isolate that and put it all on the father, this is like the father being around scenes of death and trauma, and the father dealing with some severe trauma, and the father by basically existing in this dark corridor. And with Jupiter ruling the 12th house, that can represent the father basically trying to self medicate by getting drunk all the time, which can basically bring demons out in him. But again, I believe that Jim Jones was basically a projection of his father's personal demons. And because he served in World War One, that means that Jim Jones was born after the father got out of the war, which can mean that it happened on the sperm level. See, a lot of people, they want to talk about pregnancy and what the mother shouldn't be doing when she's pregnant. Of course, mother shouldn't be drinking, shouldn't be smoking. But the issues can start at the point of conception with both parents. I remember seeing this documentary where this scientist, he was basically talking about birth defects showing up at the point of conception when both parents are drinking. You don't even have to be shit faced drunk, but if you're tipsy, that can lead to defects. And I'm talking about at the point of conception. And I forget which parent ascribed to what, but I think he said for the mother is going to be physical defects. For the father, if he's drunk while he conceives a child, it's going to be mental defects. But I might have that mixed up. So don't quote me fully. But just know that at the point of conception, if the parents aren't right, that child is likely to not come out right. So I'm saying, like, at the point of conception, Jim Jones' father's sperm was jacked up and it created a demon in the flesh. And then, of course, somehow, some way, it could have happened when Jim Jones joined the Pentecostal church as a young man that the government was able to get their hands on him. But again, think about it. The father was in the military. A lot of times these MK Ultra subjects, these patsies, these CIA, whatever you call it, these tools of the CIA, a lot of times their parents have military connections. So that's the nail in the coffin. That's all I need to hear, that the father was in the war, he was in the military, he was getting a military pension. So it would be easy for them to just pluck Jim Jones out and be like, okay, we're going to use your child as, we're going to do some experiments with him. And maybe they even tell them what they have planned. But again, a lot of these CIA tools have military connections. Timothy McVeigh is one of them too. Did Jim serve time in the military? Well, if he did, then that makes even more sense. I didn't read that part, but that would make even more sense. And then Chiron and Taurus is opposing the asteroid Selene in Scorpio. Selene deals with the moon. So I'm looking at this aspect as werewolf energy. So you know how some people are very much affected by the full moon? And it would make sense that Jim Jones would be with his Saturn opposing Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer, that he'd be very affected by the full moon. And then Chiron and Taurus opposing Selene and Scorpio. Again, that is giving werewolf type of energy. Okay, yes, I do think that the CIA will be looking at natal charts to determine who's going to be a good MK Ultra subject. Yes, I do believe it. But yes, so just to sum it up, I don't believe Jim Jones was acting of his own volition with this People's Temple cult. This cult became too big for him to have created it on his own and grew it on his own. I'm not believing it. Even when it comes to the Prime Minister of Guyana, he's suspect because it's showing that he knew about certain things before it was actually reported to the press. It could show that he was complicit. He was basically conspiring with the United States government, the CIA in particular, to hold this social experiment down in Guyana where nobody would really be paying attention. But again, most of these catastrophes, most of these massacres, usually it's not happening organically. Usually it is already pre-orchestrated by our CIA. And I look, I'm talking about the CIA. This video might get taken down. Who knows? But think about 9/11, the September 11th attacks. If you really think Osama bin Laden and his cronies did that shit, you got to wake up. So like 9/11 alone shows you what they're capable of. And this should like make you really concerned because again, if they want to generate this fear or this culture or this mindset or this type of society, they do it. They're constantly creating society. We basically live in a simulation of their own making. And when I say there, I'm talking about the evils that be. Wait a minute, Francois, you said and got away with like 60 million in back then money. Who are we talking about? But yeah, Jim Jones, one of the most prolific cult leaders in history. And again, it makes sense with him being a Taurus. Taurus is the cult leader, in my opinion. So yeah, what is this plus? What's this about? Engage with your audience. What's that mean? Oh, here's where I could start a poll. Okay. Maybe I should do a poll. Okay. I'm going to do a poll. Do you know anyone who has joined a cult? That's the first poll. I'll stick around for another 10 minutes or so and then I gotta go. All right, so I just created a poll. Do you know anyone who has ever joined a cult? Now, I have a kind of quasi cult story. I never joined a cult, but I was kind of dealing with somebody that kind of tried to recruit me in a quasi like cult type of group. And the group was called Eckankar. I don't know if anybody ever heard of them. But I remember I went to one of their meetings and I never went back. But I did buy one of their books and I still have their book. I should read some of it. Matter of fact, let me go get it real quick. Cause then we'll be able to really determine now. I haven't read this book in years. And I do remember reading like some of what's in the book I did believe in. Now, am I going to believe in it now? We don't know. But let me grab this book real quick. But it was this African dude, and I met him through my job. This is when I was working in Philly at the homeless shelter. And he was part of this group called Eckankar. Let me write it down so y'all can research this. I don't even know if they're still. I don't even know if they're still operating. But yeah, the name of the group is called Ekin Car. And they're not religious, but they're all about like mysticism and metaphysics and all this stuff. But they gave when I went to their meeting, they gave off some real cult like vibes. Let me grab the book real quick. You know what? Now I can't find it. Hold on, let me look over here. I swear I used to have the book still. Now watch I find it after this live stream. But yeah, I can't find it. I thought I had it on my bookcase. But see, I've always been searching for the truth. I've always been searching for like answers and stuff. And people like that, you are kind of vulnerable to joining groups where they claim to have the answer. They claim to know the mysteries of life and stuff like that. But that's basically what Eckankar is about. Let me see if I can Google them real quick. But I was singing this song today. It's a gospel song by the Winans. And I had to stop myself and I was like, see, that's a problem with that song. I'm about to sing a part of it to tell you what I'm talking about. Eckankar, is that how you spell it? Okay, I'm about to take y'all to this website. Hold on. We're gonna look at it together. Cause again, like I said, this African dude that I was cool with, he had a crush on me, but I wasn't feeling him at all. But he tried to recruit me into this cult like group. All right, it says Eckankar, the path of spiritual freedom. So they have a 2025 Ek Worldwide Soul Adventure Seminar. I hope I still have that book because now I'm curious about what's in it. All right, so it says you eternal, unlimited, divine. You are soul, an eternal creative being, unlimited, divine. Does something inside you long to know life's purpose? See what I mean? Like, if you're looking for the purpose of life, if you're looking for the answers to life mysteries, you are just naturally vulnerable to cult like groups if you're trying to connect with other people and find answers through others. So let me read that again. You are soul, an eternal creative being, unlimited, divine. Does something inside you long to know life's purpose, to make sense of the world around you? Eckankar is an active, individual, creative spiritual practice, a companion and roadmap for your journey home to the heights of self discovery and God discovery and beyond. Come along and discover the most secret part of yourself. The key to spiritual freedom lies within you. So you can see how attractive this is. And I'm not trying to trash this group. I really don't know much about them, but again, when I went to one of their meetings, I was getting kind of like cult like vibes. The hero's journey of advanced spiritual living. Have you ever felt a hunger for something you can't even put words to? What if you are actually on a journey, a quest that has spanned the ages, continents, lifetimes? It has survived victories, tragedies, wealth and poverty, unimaginable gains and losses, death and rebirth, time and again. The journey is worth everything because you are the hero and your saga continues until the quest is fulfilled. Now, also, I have Sun conjunct Neptune, which again, that explains why that guy was trying to get me to join this cult like group. Now, this is the part that I learned about. I remember they were teaching this in the meeting I went to. So they were talking about experience hue, the sound of soul. A divine sound courses through all life, through every blade of grass, every galaxy, every atom of our bodies. Hu is an ancient sacred name for God, a carrier of love between soul and God. When sung or chanted with an open heart, like Hu, it opens the lines of communication to the most sacred part of yourself. Shu acts as a tuning fork, aligning soul with higher states of love, creativity, healing, and awareness. It's the clear voice of God, with the power to transform the lead of human consciousness into the gold of an enlightened soul. They speak in alchemical terms there. Find your own proof of the love and power of Hugh. Hugh. And then it says spirit. Oh yeah, that's the leader of this cult. He looked kind of he look a little creepy, don't he? He kind of looked like the old man on from the Poltergeist 2 movie. God is in his holy temple. All right, spiritual teacher and guide. Spiritual teachers from an ancient lineage walk among us today. Adepts who have mastered the spiritual laws of life, embodying them in thought, word, and deed. Oh yeah, they believe in the masters too. Teachers of the highest order. These are the Ek masters. Chief among them is Mahanta, the living Ek master. See, when they get into this shit, I'm like, this is a cult. And that's why I was like, oh, hell no. The red flags were waving high when I started to read about this shit. So, again, chief among them is Mahanta, this guy right here with the suit and tie, the living Ek master. As an inner and outer spiritual teacher, his role is to awaken the God knowledge already within you. So let's click on this. Meet Sri Harold Klemp. So yeah, when they start talking about some ascended master, I'm like, uh-huh, red flag, red flag. Look at this dude. Come on now. Uh-uh. I'm not buying it. So Sri Howard Klemp is the Mahanta, the living Ek master and spiritual leader of Ekankar, the latest in a long line of spiritual adepts who have served throughout history at every culture of the world. He is a teacher and guide who helps seekers reach their full potential. Sri Harold offers creative spiritual practices that enable anyone to achieve life mastery and gain inner peace and contentment. His messages are relevant to today's spiritual needs and resonate with every generation. Inspired by inner experiences beyond the scope of the Orthodox Church of his upbringing, Sri Harold became a seeker early in life. In the late 1960s, he found the Ek teachings. His training under the ancient line of Ek masters then led to his experience of God realization. Today, his talks and writings show people how to pursue their own unique journey to self realization and God realization. Since 1981, he has been the spiritual leader for tens of thousands of people in over 120 countries who subscribe to a powerful spiritual study program for students of Ekankar. This includes written courses, spiritual exercises to experiment with, and the opportunity to join a satsang, spiritual study class. That's what I attended, a satsang. As the Mahanta, he has the ability to work inwardly with his spiritual students. People all around the world report direct experiences with him through dreams and contemplation. Sheree Howard's body of work includes more than 100 books. That's another red flag. When the cult leader has written hundreds of books, who's the other one? Uh, L. Ron Hubbard, cult leader of the Church of Scientology. He's written hundreds of books. I think he's written the most books out of anybody in history. When you have a leader writing all of these books, red flag, red flag. And I'm not talking about writing 10 books. I'm talking about when they talk about they've written more than 100 books, which have been translated into 18 languages and won multiple awards. The miraculous true life stories he shares lift the veil between heaven and earth. So, again, let me play this. The Quest for Love.
This quest for love has run in all of us throughout our many lives. And for many people, it's the driving force, and they haven't a clue as to what's driving them. They think it's money. They think it's power. They think it's the accolades of men. And they think it's a good home. They think it's the solitude of their church, the comfort of their friends. But it's really this desire for the love of God. Because you see, soul is of God, and God is love, and love is God. What is God? God is love. So simple. Love is God. So simple.
I don't trust anybody that speaks like that. But Kawhi, you said Eckankar was founded by Paul Twitchell. That's the author of the book that I have about Eckankar. I just gotta find it. I can't believe I can't find it. I don't think I threw it out. But yeah, that book is by Paul Twitchell. So Kauai said Eckankar was founded by Paul Twitchell, date of birth October 22nd, 1908. I might have to pull his chart. Thanks, Kauai. And then conservative, you said, why are the excess of books a red flag? Number one, if somebody's writing that many books, you might want to look at it as this is just how they're making money. They don't even really care about the subject material, all that. On the other hand, you could look at it as constant indoctrination to keep the cult members hooked. Like another person that wrote tons of books is Malachi Z. York. He's another cult leader. He's in prison right now due to violating children, sexually violating children. So again, I'm not talking about just writing 10 or 20 books, but when somebody has hundreds or thousands of books that they've written, that's a red flag. So again, either they're cranking out these books just to be making money and they really don't care about the subject matter of the books, or they're using those books to constantly be a means of indoctrination for these cult members. Let's Let me play a little bit more of what he got to say.
And this is what mankind is looking for. This is what drives people at the frenzied rate of today's life in the mainstream. It's what drives life in the backwaters. It exists in spite of the prejudices and the closed hearts and minds of people. This love of God is always there. And God sends always someone to show the way. God's teachers are many. There is a teacher for every classroom, for every grade, for every school.
Now, there's nothing wrong with what he's saying. But I feel like the manner in which he's saying it, it's kind of cultish. Like he's trying to almost like kind of hypnotize whoever is listening.
There are the teachers in advanced education. There are teachers in the graduate area, and on and on. And there are just teachers and teachers. And then there is the teacher of the light and sound of God, and there are several of those. And there is the teacher of the light and sound and the love of God, and many of the other things that go with the true spiritual path. The quest for love.
He said a whole bunch of nothing. But anyway, yeah, so that was the group that this dude tried to get me to join, and yeah, I started to see red flags. Let's see how much, let me see. Is there anything about money? Become an ex-student. Let's click on this real quick. So new student, no, we don't got time for all that. Let's go. Let me look at something else. Let's look at go deeper into this hue, the sound of soul. Again, this is what got my attention when they were talking about hue, and they were also talking about like the audible life stream. And I was digging some of these teachings, but along the way I was like, nah, I don't think this is for me. Okay, so y'all want to hear what Hugh sounds like? He has a little thing where we can hear what Hugh sounds like. Now that's supposed to be the voice of God. Y'all let me know if y'all believe y'all just heard the voice of God, but yeah. So again, it says hue is the sound behind all sounds woven into the language of life. It is the wind in the leaves, falling of rain, thunder of jets, singing of birds, the awful rumble of a tornado. Its sound is heard in laughter, weeping, the din of city traffic, ocean waves, and the quiet rippling of a mountain stream. It's a word people anywhere can use to address the originator of all life. Well, I heard a female voice, so I guess God is a woman. But yeah, so that concludes my live stream about Jim Jones. And the main takeaway is to maintain independence of mindset and don't go following people, so-called representatives of God, to your own detriment, where you start to not, you know, take your own well-being into account simply because you're following some leader. Conservatives said, I was talking about Jehovah Witnesses today in regards to them not allowing blood transfusions. Anybody telling you not to get a blood transfusion has never needed a blood transfusion. How about that? Yeah, exactly. And again, before I leave y'all, I'll leave y'all with this. Like, so because I was kind of shaken up, revisiting this Jim Jones story because it's so dark, I was listening to some gospel music today. And I was listening to this song by the Winans, popular gospel group back in the 80s, 90s. But it's this song called Are We Doing Your Will? And I thought about that and I'm like, your will. First of all, we get one life. Now, you could believe in the whole reincarnation and stuff, but we get one life as who we are, you know? So to have to go through life and you're following someone else's will, song is like, are we really doing your will? We've come over a lot of mountains and all we see for miles are hills. Now, I know they're talking about God's will, but if God's will is not aligned with your will, and how do we really know what God's will really is? We only know what man tells us. And the Bible was written by man. Let's make no mistake. So imagine, and this is the problem I have with religion. Religion wants you to go through your whole life living according to someone else's will and not your own. And oftentimes it's not the will of God, it's the will of the religious leaders. And a lot of times they have nothing to do with God. So I'll leave y'all with that. You know, going through this life, should you be following someone else's will or your own will? Now, we all need guidance. We all need some type of spiritual instruction, I believe. But at the end of the day, I'm like, don't follow the will of these religious leaders. Follow your own will, especially if you know in your heart that you're a good person and you try to do the right thing and you try to, you practice the golden rule, do unto others as you would have done unto you. But yeah, don't blindly follow these religious leaders because basically that's what that song I feel like is getting at. Yeah, you mean God's will, but when you break it down to the human level and you deal with these churches and stuff, a lot of times it's no longer about God. It's about these religious leaders and the will that they impose upon their flock. So yeah, but that's that. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this live stream. Again, I'm hosting a workshop next Sunday, October 19th. It's going to be about the upcoming transit of Saturn in Aries. And this workshop is going to basically tell you how to navigate Saturn and Aries, how to make the best of it, and what to watch out for. I'll be talking about Saturn and Aries, how it will play out through the houses. So, everybody will be able to understand how Saturn will affect you house wise. And I'll also be talking about some of the key signs that Saturn and Aries will be interacting with, both positive and negative, and what you can expect out of that. So if you would like to purchase a ticket, the link is in the description section of this video. Also, if you would like to purchase a reading, the link to my website is in the description section as well. So everybody, good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. Love y'all. Peace, many blessings. I'll be back soon with some more videos.